Elizabeth Clare Dawson's tears mingled with the rain as she sat abandoned on the church steps. Her white wedding gown soaked through, the delicate lace turning to a sodden mess that clung to her trembling form. The note in her hand, penned by her fiancé of 3 years, had only 5 cruel words. "I cannot marry you. Goodbye." Standing there in front of the empty church in Willow Creek, Montana, 1885, Josephine felt utterly alone, the thunder above perfectly matching the storm in her heart. "Miss, you'll catch your death out here." The deep voice startled her. Through the curtain of rain, she could make out a tall figure on horseback. As he came closer, she saw a weather-beaten face beneath the brim of a worn Stetson, his expression a mixture of concern and something she couldn't quite place. "It don't matter much now," she replied, her voice barely audible over the downpour. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing broad shoulders and the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Name's Nathan Eastwood," he said, removing his hat and revealing dark hair with strands of silver at the temples. "My ranch is a few miles north of here." "Seems to me you might need someplace dry." Josephine looked up at him through swollen eyes. "I'm Josephine Dawson, and I was supposed to be married today." Nathan's face softened. "I figured as much." He glanced at the empty church, then back to the bedraggled bride. "Reckon he didn't show." "Worse," she whispered. "He showed, then changed his mind." She held up the crumpled note. Without another word, Nathan removed his duster and draped it over her shoulders. "Miss Dawson, I don't make a habit of this, but I can't in good conscience leave you here. I've got a spare room. You can get warm, dry off, and figure things out come morning." Josephine hesitated. Propriety dictated she refuse, but propriety had also dictated she'd be a married woman by sundown. Besides, what options did she have? Her parents had passed 3 years ago, and she'd given up her position as the schoolteacher in anticipation of married life. Her meager belongings were packed in trunks at what was supposed to be her new home, a home she could never set foot in now. "I don't want charity, Mr. Eastwood." "It ain't charity, it's basic human decency." He extended his hand, "And it's just Nathan." Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. She took his hand, surprised by its warmth despite the cold rain. With surprising grace, he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite their proximity. "I've got a lady who helps at the ranch, Mrs. Holloway. She'll get you settled," he said, his voice close to her ear as they set off. "No need to fret about your reputation." As they rode away from Willow Creek, Josephine felt an odd mixture of shame, relief, and something unexpected, a flicker of curiosity about the quiet cowboy whose steady arms encircled, but didn't touch her, as he guided his horse through the storm. Nathan's ranch came into view after a 30-minute ride. Despite her distress, Josephine couldn't help but admire the neat buildings nestled in a valley, with mountains rising in the background. The main house was larger than she expected, 2 stories of sturdy timber with a wide porch. Several outbuildings and corrals completed the picture of a successful operation. "The Double E," Nathan said, noticing her interest. "Been in my family for 20 years now." "Inside, Mrs. Holloway." A round woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner took one look at Josephine and immediately began fussing. "Land's sake, child, you're soaked clean through. Come along now, we'll get you warmed up." Nathan retreated to the kitchen while Mrs. Holloway led Josephine upstairs to a comfortable bedroom. The older woman helped her out of her ruined wedding dress, tusking sympathetically as Josephine briefly explained her situation. "That Franklin Whitaker never was worth spit," Mrs. Holloway declared, wringing out the sodden gown. "All flash and no substance. You're better off, though I know it don't feel that way now." She provided Josephine with a nightgown and robe, both slightly large but clean and dry. "These belonged to Mr. Eastwood's sister when she visited last summer. She won't mind you borrowing them." When Josephine was settled by the fire in the parlor with a cup of hot tea, Nathan returned. He'd changed into dry clothes, a simple shirt and trousers that somehow suited him better than fancy attire would have. "Mrs. Holloway's preparing the spare room," he said, sitting across from her. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "I can't impose," Josephine protested weakly. Perhaps in the morning you could take me to the stage depot. I have a cousin in Denver who might take me in. Nathan regarded her thoughtfully. No need to make hasty decisions. Besides, there won't be a stage for 3 days. Spring rains washed out part of the road south. He hesitated. Miss Dawson, I realize this is forward, but I find myself short-handed. My housekeeper could use help, and I need someone with book learning to help with correspondence and accounts. If you're interested, I can offer room, board, and wages until you decide your next step. Josephine blinked in surprise. You'd hire me. You don't know anything about me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I know you were the school teacher until recently. Folks speak highly of your intelligence, and frankly, anyone Franklin Whitaker would abandon isn't likely to be of poor character. That startled a laugh from her, the first since the nightmare began. You know him, know of him. His father and mine had business dealings years back. His expression darkened momentarily. Not pleasant ones. Josephine considered his offer. The alternative was throwing herself on her cousin's reluctant charity, a cousin who had made it clear that unmarried female relatives were burdensome. This at least would give her time to recover her dignity and make plans. I accept your offer, Mr. Eastwood. Thank you. Nathan, he corrected gently. If we're to work together, might as well use given names, and you're welcome, Josephine. The way he said her name like something precious made her heart flutter strangely. She attributed it to exhaustion and the emotional day. That night, in the unfamiliar comfort of the spare room, Josephine cried herself to sleep one last time. She promised herself there would be no more tears wasted on a man who could abandon her so cruelly. Tomorrow would be the first day of her new life, whatever that might be. When Josephine awoke the next morning, sunlight streamed through lace curtains. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was and why. Then yesterday's events crashed back and she closed her eyes against the pain, but something had shifted overnight. Instead of devastation, she felt a dull ache, and beneath it, a steely determination. Mrs. Holloway had left a simple dress on the chair, navy blue, modest, and close enough to her size to be serviceable. Josephine dressed quickly, pinning her hair in a simple style. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the blushing bride. In her place stood a woman with shadows under her eyes but a firm set to her jaw. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Holloway preparing breakfast. The housekeeper looked up with a smile. Good morning, Miss Dawson. Sleep well. As well as could be expected, Josephine admitted, and please call me Josephine. Then you must call me Mary, the older woman replied. Mr. Eastwood's already been out since dawn. Man never rests. She gestured to the kitchen table. Sit, you need feeding up. Josephine obeyed, accepting a plate piled with eggs, bacon, and biscuits still steaming from the oven. This is far too much. Nonsense, can't work on an empty stomach. Mary poured her coffee. Mr. Eastwood said you'll be helping with the books and such, so it seems. Josephine took a sip of the strong coffee. Though I confess I'm not entirely sure what that entails. Running a ranch this size generates more paperwork than you'd expect. Supply orders, correspondence with cattle buyers, payroll for the hands. Mary sat across from her. The previous fellow who helped Mr. Henderson passed last winter. Mr. Eastwood's been managing alone since, but he's more suited to working the land than pushing papers. After breakfast, Mary gave her a tour of the house. It was larger than it appeared from outside. 6 bedrooms upstairs, a study, parlor, dining room, and spacious kitchen below. The furnishings were solid and well-made but not ostentatious. Mr. Eastwood's not one for showing off, Mary explained as they entered the study. His father was different, all flash and gold fixtures. When Nathan took over after his parents died, he sold half the fancy stuff and put the money back into the ranch. The study was clearly a working space. A large desk dominated one wall, with bookshelves lining another. Papers were stacked in neat piles, but there were many of them. This is where you'll spend most of your time, Mary said. Mr. Eastwood keeps regular hours in here after supper, but the rest of the day he's out with the men. Josephine approached the desk, noting the careful organization despite the volume of paperwork. I'll do my best not to disrupt his system. You'll likely improve it, Mary chuckled. Nathan Eastwood is many things honest, hardworking, fair, but no one would accuse him of loving ledgers and letters. Just then, the man himself entered, bringing with him the scent of open air and horses. He removed his hat, revealing hair damp with sweat. "Morning, ladies. I see you're getting acquainted with your domain, Miss Dawson." "Josephine," she corrected, remembering their agreement from the previous night. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Josephine." He crossed to the desk and extracted a leather-bound book from a drawer. "This is the ranch ledger. It records all expenses and income. Mr. Henderson kept it current until January. I've made entries as best I could, but I'd be grateful if you'd review them." She accepted the ledger, their fingers brushing briefly. "I'll start today." "No rush," he said. "Take time to settle in." "I'd rather keep busy," she replied honestly. Nathan nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Then I'll leave you to it." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and your trunks will be delivered this afternoon. I sent one of the hands to collect them from town." Josephine felt a rush of gratitude mixed with embarrassment. "You didn't have to, I know," he said simply, "but you'll need your things." After he left, Mary gave Josephine a knowing look. "That's Nathan Eastwood for you, always thinking ahead." Left alone in the study, Josephine opened the ledger and began examining the entries. Nathan's handwriting was surprisingly neat, strong, clear strokes that reflected his character. She found herself wondering about the man who had taken her in with such casual kindness. There was clearly more to him than the taciturn cowboy he appeared to be. By midday, Josephine had organized the scattered invoices and was deep into reconciling the ledger when a knock at the door interrupted her. Nathan stood there, his expression unreadable. "I'm riding into town for supplies. Thought you might want to come along, get some air, maybe pick up anything you need." His tone was casual, but she sensed an underlying concern. Josephine's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of facing the townspeople after yesterday was mortifying. But hiding away would only make the eventual encounter worse. Better to face it head-on with dignity. "Thank you. I would like that." They rode in the wagon, Nathan handling the team with easy confidence while maintaining a respectful distance from Josephine on the seat. The spring day was glorious, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and mountains gleaming in the distance. "It's beautiful country," she observed, breaking the comfortable silence. Nathan nodded. "That it is. Different from back east, but it gets in your blood. You weren't born here." "Boston originally. My father came west during the gold rush, but he was smart enough to invest in land instead of chasing color." Nathan glanced at her. "What about you?" "St. Louis," she replied. "My father was a professor at Washington University. When he and mother died of influenza, I took the teaching position here. It seemed adventurous at the time." A small smile touched Nathan's lips. "And has it been adventurous?" Josephine thought of the past 3 years, the initial loneliness, meeting Franklin, the whirlwind courtship, and now this unexpected turn. "Perhaps more than I bargained for." As they approached town, Josephine tensed visibly. Nathan noticed but said nothing until they reached the main street. Then, instead of stopping at the general store as she expected, he continued to the far end of town where a small dressmaker's shop stood. "Mrs. Chen makes the finest clothes this side of Denver," he explained as he helped her down. "Mary mentioned you might need a few things, considering." He trailed off, but Josephine understood. Most of her clothes were practical teaching garments. For ranch life, she would need sturdier items. "You're very thoughtful," she said softly. "But I don't want to presume. Consider it an advance on your wages," Nathan said firmly. "Can't have my business manager looking shabby, can I?" Inside the shop, Mrs. Chen, a petite Chinese woman with clever eyes, took one look at Josephine and immediately began pulling fabrics. "You need practical things, yes, but also pretty. A woman should have pretty things." While Josephine was being fitted, Nathan excused himself to handle other errands. By the time he returned, Mrs. Chen had outfitted her with 2 everyday dresses, a riding skirt with divided legs hidden in its folds, several shirtwaists, and undergarments that made Josephine blush to think about Nathan paying for them. To her relief, he simply settled the bill without examining the items wrapped in brown paper. "Everything suitable?" he asked as they loaded the packages into the wagon. "More than suitable. Mrs. Chen is a marvel." As they made their way through town, Josephine was acutely aware of curious glances and whispered conversations. Finally, outside the mercantile, they encountered what she'd been dreading: Franklin's mother, Agatha Whittaker. The older woman stopped dead, her face contorting with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. "Miss Dawson, we expected you would have left town by now." Josephine felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Nathan stepped slightly forward. "Mrs. Whittaker," he acknowledged coolly. "Miss Dawson has accepted a position managing affairs at the Double E." Agatha's eyes widened as she glanced between them. "I see," she said, in a tone that implied she saw something scandalous indeed. "How convenient for you both." Nathan's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Dawson's skills are an asset to my operation. As for convenience, I find honesty and integrity far more convenient than their alternatives." The pointed remark wasn't lost on Agatha, whose own husband's business dealings were rumored to be less than scrupulous. Flustered, the older woman drew herself up. "Well, I must be going. Good day to you." She hurried away, already visibly bursting to share this new development with her gossip circle. Nathan turned to Josephine. "I apologize if I overstepped. Those people have a gift for raising my hackles." Despite everything, Josephine felt a smile tugging at her lips. "No apology necessary. In fact, thank you." She hesitated, "though I fear we've just become the subject of fresh gossip." "Let them talk," Nathan said dismissively. "Anyone worth their salt in this town knows better than to put stock in Whittaker venom." As they completed their errands, Josephine noticed something interesting. While some townsfolk regarded her with pitying or curious looks, many others, particularly the working men and women, treated Nathan with genuine respect and her with simple courtesy. By the time they headed back to the ranch, she felt oddly lighter, as if facing the town had exorcised some of yesterday's shame. That evening, after a simple but hearty dinner, Nathan invited Josephine to join him on the porch. The spring twilight was peaceful, with crickets beginning their nightly chorus and the last streaks of sunset painting the western sky. "How are you really doing?" he asked quietly as they sat in matching rocking chairs. The unexpected question caught her off guard. For a moment, Josephine considered giving the polite answer that she was fine, grateful for his help and looking forward to her work. But something in Nathan's direct gaze invited honesty. "I feel angry," she admitted. "Not just at Franklin, but at myself for being so blind. There were signs I ignored, thinking love would conquer all." She looked down at her hands. "And I feel foolish. The entire town witnessed my humiliation." Nathan was silent for so long that she thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was contemplative. "My father used to say that humiliation is just pride having its mask ripped off." He turned to look at her. "But I disagree. What happened to you wasn't about pride, it was about trust betrayed. There's no shame in trusting someone who presented themselves as trustworthy." His words were like a balm to her raw spirit. "Thank you for that. Don't thank me for speaking truth," he replied. Then, with a slight change of subject, "I looked over what you did with the ledger today. Impressive work." "I've barely begun," Josephine demurred. "Still, you've got a good head for numbers. That'll serve you well, whatever you decide to do next." The implication that this arrangement was temporary should have been comforting, a reminder that she wasn't trapped, that she had choices. Instead, Josephine felt an odd pang at the thought of eventually leaving this place. "I may have been hasty in mentioning my cousin in Denver," she said carefully. "The truth is, we're not close, and she made it clear when my parents died that she had little interest in playing guardian to a grown niece." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Well, there's no hurry to decide anything. The Double E has stood for 20 years, it'll stand a while longer." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell completely, the stars emerging in brilliant clarity that only the western sky could provide. Josephine found herself studying Nathan's profile: the strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes that seemed to reflect a depth of experience beyond his years. "How old are you, Nathan?" she asked suddenly, then blushed at her forwardness. If he was surprised by the question, he didn't show it. 34 come August, and you?" 25 last month, he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Old enough to know your own mind then." Some might disagree, given recent events, she said dryly. Nathan actually chuckled at that, a warm sound she hadn't heard before. Trusting someone who doesn't deserve it doesn't make you mindless, just human. He rose from his chair. Speaking of which, this human needs sleep. Dawn comes early on a ranch. As Josephine prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Just yesterday morning, she'd awakened as a bride-to-be, filled with nervous excitement about her future. Now, she was sleeping under the roof of a man she barely knew, contemplating a future entirely different from anything she'd imagined. Yet somehow, beneath the lingering hurt and confusion, Josephine felt something unexpected taking root, a tentative sense of possibility, as if a door had closed only for a window to open somewhere else. The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings found Josephine in the study, organizing correspondence, updating ledgers, and gradually bringing order to the ranch's business affairs. Afternoons often included practical tasks around the house, helping Mary with household management, or occasionally riding out with Nathan to learn more about the operation. She discovered that the Double E was larger than she'd initially realized, nearly 15,000 acres, with several hundred head of cattle, 24 horses, and various other livestock. 8 ranch hands lived in the bunkhouse year-round, with more hired during busy seasons. Nathan proved to be a fair employer, demanding but never unreasonable, and his men respected him accordingly. Josephine noticed how he always ate with them when they worked cattle, never putting on airs despite being their boss. "A man who won't share his table with his workers has no business leading them," he told her when she commented on it. "My father taught me that, one of the few useful things he did teach." As May turned to June, Josephine found herself increasingly comfortable at the Double E. Her initial awkwardness around Nathan faded, replaced by an easy camaraderie that occasionally surprised her with its depth. He was not a man of many words, but when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often unexpectedly perceptive. She learned bits and pieces of his history, how his father had driven his mother to an early grave with his demanding ways, how Nathan had taken over the ranch at 25 when both parents died within months of each other, how he'd spent the next 9 years building something that was truly his own rather than an extension of his father's ambition. In turn, she shared stories of her own childhood, her professor father's gentle encouragement of her education, her mother's determination that she learn practical skills alongside academic ones, the devastation of losing them both within a week to influenza. One particular evening in late June stood out in her memory. A summer storm had blown in suddenly, forcing the ranch hands to hurriedly secure equipment and animals. Nathan had returned to the house drenched, his shirt clinging to his torso in a way that made Josephine acutely aware of his physical presence. Mary had clucked around him like a mother hen, insisting he change before catching his death. When he returned to the kitchen in dry clothes, his hair still damp and slightly tousled, Josephine had felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the excellent stew Mary had prepared. Over dinner, Nathan had been unusually talkative, telling stories of cattle drives and the characters he'd met over the years. His normally serious face transformed when he laughed, revealing smile lines around his eyes that spoke of joy too seldom indulged. Later, as they sat by the fire in the parlor, a habit they developed for evenings when the day's business needed discussing, Nathan surprised her with a question. "Do you ever miss teaching?" Josephine considered this. "Sometimes. I enjoyed watching children discover new ideas. But I find I like what I'm doing now just as much, perhaps more." "How so?" "Teaching was rewarding, but somewhat predictable. Here, every day brings something new to learn," she smiled. "Just yesterday, I finally understood the difference between feeder cattle and breeding stock financing." Nathan returned her smile. "Riveting stuff. You mock, but it actually is interesting. Everything connects: weather, markets, breeding cycles, land management. It's like a complex puzzle where all the pieces must fit perfectly." "That's exactly it," he said, looking at her with newfound appreciation. "Most folks just see cows and cowboys, not the whole pattern." "Most folks don't look closely enough at anything," Josephine replied. Then, impulsively, Why did you never marry Nathan? The question hung between them, more intimate than she'd intended. For a moment she thought he might not answer. Never found the right woman, I suppose, he finally said. Or perhaps I did and the timing wasn't right. There was something in his tone, a hint of old pain that made Josephine wonder, but she didn't press. Instead, she found herself saying, Franklin once told me I was too opinionated for a proper wife. That men want softness and compliance, not sharp minds and sharper tongues. Nathan's expression darkened. Then Franklin is an even bigger fool than I thought. He met her eyes directly. A man who can't appreciate a woman's mind doesn't deserve her heart. The words lingered between them, charging the air with something Josephine wasn't ready to name. She looked away first, suddenly conscious of how alone they were in the flickering firelight. It's getting late, she said softly. I should retire. Nathan stood when she did, ever the gentleman. Of course. Sleep well, Josephine. That night, her dreams were confusing fragments of her abandoned wedding, intermingled with images of Nathan's face, his rare smile, his steady hands. She woke feeling unsettled, wondering if she was simply transferring her feelings from one man to another out of gratitude or convenience. No, she decided firmly as she dressed for the day. What she felt for Nathan, whatever it was, bore no resemblance to her infatuation with Franklin. That had been all flutter and excitement, a girl's dream of romance. This was something else. Something that grew slowly, rooted in respect and genuine affection rather than dramatic gestures and pretty words. Whether Nathan shared any of these confusing feelings remained a mystery. He was unfailingly kind and respectful, but also carefully proper. Not once in the 2 months she'd lived at the Double E had he made any gesture that could be construed as romantic interest. Perhaps that was for the best, Josephine told herself. She was still healing from betrayal. Nathan was her employer. And the entire town would certainly view any relationship between them as scandalous, given the circumstances of her arrival at his ranch. Yet as June turned to July, she found herself increasingly aware of him, the sound of his boots on the porch, the scent of leather and clean sweat that accompanied him after a day's work, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when something amused him. The 4th of July brought an unexpected opportunity for socializing. The town of Willow Creek held an annual celebration, and despite her initial reluctance, Josephine agreed to accompany Nathan and Mary. She wore one of her new dresses, a summer frock in cornflower blue that Mrs. Chen had insisted complimented her eyes. The town square was festively decorated with bunting and flags, with tables laden with food contributed by local families. A small band played patriotic tunes, and children darted about waving small flags and stealing cookies when mothers weren't looking. Josephine was nervous at first, but she soon found that her position at the Double E had granted her a strange new status. Townspeople who had previously viewed her only as the schoolteacher, or later, the abandoned bride, now approached her with questions about the ranch or comments about cattle prices. She realized that in their eyes, she had transformed from an object of pity to a woman of substance. Nathan Eastwood's business manager commanded respect. As for Nathan himself, she noticed how differently he behaved in town compared to at the ranch. He was polite but reserved with most folks, warming only with a few he clearly considered friends: the blacksmith, the doctor and his wife, the elderly couple who ran the newspaper. When the dancing began after sundown, Josephine expected to sit on the sidelines. Instead, to her surprise, Nathan offered his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked formally. The tune was a simple waltz, and Nathan proved to be an accomplished dancer. His hand at her waist was firm but gentle, guiding her with subtle pressure. "You dance well," she observed, looking up at him. In the lantern light, his features seemed softer somehow. "My mother's influence," he replied. "She insisted a gentleman should know how to dance properly. She taught you well." As they moved around the makeshift dance floor, Josephine became aware of curious glances and whispered comments. Most seemed benign, even approving, but she couldn't help noticing Agatha Whittaker's pinched expression as she watched them from a bench near the band. Nathan noticed too. "Ignore her," he murmured close to Josephine's ear. She's just vexed that you're thriving instead of withering away dramatically. The comment surprised a laugh from Josephine. Is that what I'm doing, thriving? Nathan's eyes held hers, suddenly serious. Aren't you? Before she could answer, the music ended. Nathan released her properly, with a small bow, but his question lingered as they rejoined Mary at one of the tables. Later, as they were preparing to leave, Franklin Whitaker himself appeared, clearly having enjoyed too much of the whiskey being passed among the men behind the schoolhouse. His normally handsome face was flushed, his movements loose and uncoordinated. Well, if it isn't the grieving bride, he slurred, stepping directly into Josephine's path. Though you don't look particularly heartbroken. His gaze slid to Nathan, standing a few feet away in conversation with the blacksmith. Found yourself a replacement mighty quick, didn't you? Josephine felt heat rising to her face, not embarrassment this time, but anger. Mr. Whitaker, you forfeited any right to comment on my life when you left me at the altar. Franklin's expression darkened. Don't act so high and mighty. Everyone knows why Eastwood took you in. He leaned closer, his breath sour with alcohol. Tell me, did you warm his bed that very night, or did you at least pretend to mourn me for a day or two? Before Josephine could respond, Nathan was there, his presence solid and unwavering beside her. That's enough, Whitaker, he said, his voice deceptively calm. Apologize to the lady and be on your way, Franklin sneered. Or what, Eastwood, you'll defend her honor? Bit late for that, isn't it? What happened next was so swift that Josephine barely registered it. One moment Franklin was standing there with his ugly smirk. The next, he was on the ground, holding his jaw and looking up at Nathan with shock. I said apologize, Nathan repeated, his voice still level but with steel beneath it. Franklin scrambled to his feet, his bravado deflated by the single efficient blow. You'll regret this, Eastwood, he muttered, but there was fear in his eyes now. My father, your father knows better than to cross me, Nathan cut him off. Now apologize to Miss Dawson, or the next one won't be nearly so gentle. Trapped, Franklin mumbled something that barely qualified as an apology before slinking away, several onlookers chuckling at his retreat. Nathan turned to Josephine, his expression concerned. Are you all right? Yes, she said, surprised to find it was true. Seeing Franklin again had not reopened the wound as she'd feared. Instead, she felt nothing but relief that she'd escaped marriage to such a man. Thank you, but you shouldn't have. Yes, I should have, Nathan interrupted firmly. Then more gently. No one speaks to you that way, not in my presence. The ride home was quiet, Mary dozing in the back of the wagon while Josephine and Nathan sat side by side on the seat. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky, and a nearly full moon illuminated the road. Did you mean what you said? Josephine finally asked. About Franklin's father knowing better than to cross you. Nathan was silent for a moment, his eyes on the road. George Whitaker and my father had business dealings years ago. It didn't end well for George. His jaw tightened. He tried to cheat my father out of his share of a mining venture. My father may have been many things, but he wasn't a man to be swindled. What happened? My father had documentation proof that Whitaker had falsified records. Rather than expose him publicly, which would have ruined his reputation and business, my father used it as leverage. Nathan glanced at her. The Whitakers have resented us ever since, but they're careful to keep it to petty social slights. Is that why Franklin? Josephine couldn't finish the question. Why he jilted you? Nathan shook his head. I doubt it. Franklin's simply a coward following in his father's footsteps. If anything, your connection to me after the fact probably galls them more than whatever sorry reasons he had for running. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, broken only by the steady clop of hooves and the occasional night bird's call. As the ranch came into view, Josephine found herself reluctant for the evening to end. I am, you know, she said softly as Nathan helped her down from the wagon. Or what? Thriving. She met his gaze in the moonlight. You asked earlier, and I am. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I'm happier now than I've been in a long time. Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a softening, a warmth that made her breath catch. For a heartbeat, she thought he might say something meaningful, might even close the distance between them. Instead, he simply nodded. I'm glad, he said quietly. You deserve happiness, Josephine. The moment passed, and they went inside, where Mary was already bustling about despite the late hour, making tea and chattering about the festivities. But something had changed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that their relationship was evolving into something neither had anticipated. July brought intense heat, and the busiest time of the ranching year. Cattle needed moving to higher pastures, hay required cutting and storing, and 100 other tasks demanded attention from sunup to sundown. Josephine found her role expanding beyond the account books as she took on more responsibilities, freeing Nathan to focus on the physical work. She surprised herself with how quickly she adapted to ranch life. The city girl who had once considered a muddy street a hardship now thought nothing of riding for hours in the dust, helping with the garden in sweltering heat, or even assisting Mary with the messy business of preserving summer's bounty for the winter ahead. One particularly scorching afternoon, Josephine was in the kitchen with Mary, their faces flushed from the heat of boiling water as they canned peaches from the small orchard behind the house. Nathan entered unexpectedly, his shirt dark with sweat, his expression troubled. What's wrong? Josephine asked immediately, recognizing the tension in his shoulders. Riders coming, 4 of them, Whitaker and some hired men. He moved to the window, peering out. Mary, fetch my rifle from the study, please. The housekeeper hurried to comply while Josephine joined Nathan at the window. In the distance, she could make out 4 horsemen approaching slowly. Why would George Whitaker come here? She asked, a knot of apprehension forming in her stomach. Nothing good, Nathan replied grimly. He's been trying to buy the water rights to Silver Creek for years. My father refused, and so have I. Mary returned with the rifle, which Nathan checked methodically before setting it against the wall near the door, visible but not directly threatening. Stay inside, he told both women. I'll handle this. I'm coming with you, Josephine said firmly. When Nathan started to protest, she added, if this is about ranch business, your business manager should be present. A flash of something like pride crossed his face. All right, but stay behind me. They stepped onto the porch just as the riders reached the yard. George Whitaker was instantly recognizable, a florid-faced man with the same handsome features as his son, though coarsened by age and indulgence. The 3 men with him had the hard look of hired guns, their eyes constantly scanning the property. Eastwood, Whitaker called without dismounting. I hear you put hands on my boy last night. Nathan's posture remained relaxed, but Josephine sensed his readiness. Your boy insulted a lady in my company. He received exactly what he deserved. Whitaker's gaze shifted to Josephine, his expression contemptuous. Lady. Is that what you're calling her these days? He turned back to Nathan. Listen, Eastwood, I don't care what arrangement you've got with Franklin's leavings, but nobody touches my son. Josephine felt her cheeks burning with humiliation and anger, but before she could speak, Nathan stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. Choose your next words very carefully, Whitaker. That's the only warning you get. Something in his tone must have registered, because Whitaker's bluster faltered slightly. One of his men shifted nervously in his saddle. I didn't come here to trade insults, Whitaker said, changing tack. I came to make you an offer. Silver Creek water rights, name your price. Not for sale, Nathan replied flatly. Same answer as always. Don't be a fool, Eastwood. That creek is worth more for mining than it ever will be for your cattle. I'm prepared to offer $10,000. Despite the tension, Josephine couldn't suppress a small gasp. It was an enormous sum, enough to transform the ranch or provide a comfortable life elsewhere. Nathan didn't even blink. The creek isn't for sale at any price, Whitaker. It feeds this entire valley. Divert it for mining, and you destroy not just my ranch, but every small farm downstream. Whitaker's face darkened with anger. You're making a mistake. Times are changing. Cattle won't be king forever. Maybe not, Nathan agreed calmly. But water always will be, and I won't sell the lifeblood of this land to a man who'd poison it for gold. For a tense moment, Josephine thought Whitaker might order his men to attack. Instead, he spat on the ground. This isn't over, Eastwood. One way or another, I'll have that creek. He wheeled his horse around. Think about my offer. It won't be open forever. As the riders departed, Josephine let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Will he try again?" Nathan nodded, his eyes still on the retreating figures. "Whitaker doesn't give up easily, and he's right about one thing: mining interests are moving into the territory. There's pressure on all the ranchers." He turned to her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to hear his insults." "I've heard worse," she said, though the words had stung. "Is the creek really so valuable?" "More than he knows," Nathan admitted. "There's gold in the upper reaches, not enough for a major strike, but a decent deposit. My father discovered it years ago but never developed it. He believed, as I do, that the water itself is more precious than whatever metals might be found in it." Josephine was struck by the wisdom of this perspective. "You could have taken his offer. $10,000 is a fortune." "Money comes and goes," Nathan said simply. "Land endures." He looked out across the valley, his expression thoughtful. "Besides, the double E isn't just mine. It belongs to all who depend on it: the hands, the livestock, even the wild creatures that drink from the creek." In that moment, watching him gaze out over his domain with such quiet stewardship, Josephine realized she was falling in love with Nathan Eastwood. Not with dramatic suddenness, but with the steady certainty of recognizing something true and right. This was not the giddy infatuation she'd felt for Franklin, but something deeper: a resonance of values, a shared vision of what mattered in life. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey, both surprising and inevitable at once. Summer faded into autumn, bringing cooler days and the vibrant colors of turning leaves. The rhythms of the ranch shifted from the frenetic pace of summer to the more measured preparations for winter. Cattle were brought down from high pastures, the last hay was cut and stored, and preserves lined the cellar shelves in neat rows. Josephine's position at the Double E had evolved as well. What had begun as a temporary arrangement born of necessity had become something permanent and valued. Nathan now consulted her on all business decisions, and the hands had grown accustomed to taking certain instructions directly from Miss Jo. As they called her, her feelings for Nathan had deepened, though she kept them carefully guarded. There had been moments when she thought he might feel the same: a lingering glance, a touch that lasted a heartbeat too long, conversations by the fire that stretched into the small hours of the morning. Yet he maintained a careful distance, never crossing the invisible line that separated employer from employee, friend from something more. The third week of October brought the first snow, just a dusting that melted by midday, but a harbinger of the winter to come. That evening, Nathan announced that he needed to ride to Cheyenne on business. "The Army's looking for cavalry remounts," he explained over dinner. "They're offering good prices for quality stock, and we've got several 3-year-olds ready to sell. When will you leave?" Josephine asked, trying to mask her disappointment at the thought of his absence. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds. I should be back within 10 days. He hesitated. "Unless you'd care to accompany me. The railroad makes it an easy journey now, and Cheyenne has some fine shops. You might enjoy the change of scenery." Josephine's heart leapt at the invitation, but prudence made her hesitate. "Would it be appropriate?" Mary, bustling around the table with the coffee pot, snorted. "Land's sake, child, you've been living under the same roof for 6 months. If folks were going to talk, that ship has sailed." She gave Nathan a pointed look. "Besides, Mr. Eastwood's sister is currently visiting friends in Cheyenne. You could stay with her, which would satisfy even the most stringent propriety." Nathan nodded. "I'd already written to inform Rebecca we'd be coming." At Josephine's surprise, he added, "That is, if you wish to." "I do," she said simply. "Thank you for thinking of it." The journey to Cheyenne took a full day by train, but Josephine hardly noticed the time passing. She was too absorbed in the changing landscape outside the window and the rare opportunity to converse with Nathan without interruptions or the press of work. He told her stories of his childhood in Boston, of his mother's gentle refinement at odds with his father's rough ambition, of his decision to make the Double E something different from what his father had envisioned. He saw the land as something to conquer and exploit, Nathan explained, his gaze distant. "I see it as something to steward. That's the fundamental difference between us." In turn, Josephine shared more of her own history, her passion for learning, her father's progressive views on women's education, her brief teaching career in St. Louis before coming west. "Why did you leave St. Louis?" Nathan asked. "Surely there were more opportunities there than in Willow Creek." Josephine smiled ruefully. "After my parents died, the house felt haunted, not by ghosts but by memories. Every corner held some reminder of what I'd lost." She looked out at the passing landscape. "I wanted a fresh start, somewhere completely different. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana Territory, it felt like fate." "And then you met Franklin," Nathan said quietly. "Yes," she met his eyes. "He was charming, attentive, the son of the town's most prominent citizen showing interest in the new schoolteacher. It was flattering. And I was lonely." She shook her head at her own naivety. "When he proposed after just 6 months, I should have questioned it, but I wanted to believe in the fairy tale." "There's no shame in wanting love," Nathan said, his expression gentle. "The shame lies with the man who used that desire to manipulate you." His understanding touched her deeply. "Thank you for saying that, and for everything since." The moment between them stretched, filled with unspoken emotions. Nathan's eyes held hers, and Josephine thought he might finally bridge the gap between them. But then the conductor announced their imminent arrival in Cheyenne, and the moment passed. Rebecca Eastwood proved to be a delightful surprise, a tall, handsome woman in her early 30s with her brother's direct gaze, but a more expressive manner. She welcomed Josephine warmly to her friend's spacious home near the center of Cheyenne. "Nathan's letters have mentioned you frequently," Rebecca said as she showed Josephine to a comfortable guest room. "Though he failed to mention how pretty you are." Josephine blushed. "You're too kind. Your brother has been a tremendous help to me during a difficult time." Rebecca's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Yes, Nathan has always had a knack for rescuing strays, injured birds, orphaned colts, the occasional damsel in distress." She patted Josephine's hand. "Though I suspect you're more resilient than most." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. While Nathan conducted his business with the Army quartermasters, Rebecca took Josephine shopping, introducing her to Cheyenne society with easy confidence. The city was a fascinating mix of frontier rawness and Eastern sophistication, with elegant shops alongside saloons, and society matrons walking the same streets as cowboys and soldiers. On their third evening, Rebecca's friends hosted a small dinner party. Josephine wore a new dress, a deep burgundy silk that Rebecca had insisted suited her coloring perfectly. When Nathan saw her descending the stairs, his expression made her heart flutter. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The dinner party was pleasant, the conversation lively. Josephine found herself seated beside a handsome cavalry officer who paid her marked attention throughout the meal. Captain James Thornton was everything Franklin had pretended to be: charming, intelligent, and seemingly genuine in his interest. "Miss Dawson, you must allow me to show you the officers' quarters tomorrow," he said as they took coffee in the drawing room after dinner. "We have quite a collection of books that might interest you, given your background in education." Before Josephine could respond, Nathan appeared at her side. "I'm afraid Miss Dawson has already committed to accompanying me to the stock auction tomorrow morning," he said, his tone polite but firm. Captain Thornton raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps another time then." He bowed slightly to Josephine. "I hope we'll meet again before you return to Montana." When the captain moved away, Josephine turned to Nathan with mild exasperation. "I wasn't aware I'd committed to the auction," she said quietly. "My apologies," Nathan replied, not sounding particularly apologetic. "I assumed you'd want to see the proceedings, given your role in the ranch's business." Josephine studied him for a moment, noticing the slight tension in his jaw. "Are you jealous, Nathan?" His eyes widened fractionally before he controlled his expression. "I'm concerned about your welfare." "Thornton has a reputation with ladies." "I see." She couldn't quite suppress a small smile. "Well, thank you for your concern. I'll be happy to accompany you to the auction." Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Josephine replayed the interaction in her mind. Nathan's protectiveness might simply be that of an employer looking out for his employee, or a friend watching over a friend. But the flash of what looked very much like possessiveness in his eyes suggested something more. The thought both thrilled and troubled her. If Nathan did have feelings beyond friendship, why had he never expressed them? And if he didn't, why did he seem so discomfited by another man's attention? The answer came unexpectedly the following afternoon. Nathan had indeed taken her to the stock auction, where his expertise had impressed even the most seasoned ranchers. They were walking back to Rebecca's friend's house, enjoying the crisp autumn air, when Nathan suddenly stopped. "Josephine," he said, his tone serious, "there's something I should have told you months ago." Her heart quickened. "What is it?" He gestured to a small park nearby. "Could we sit for a moment?" They found a bench beneath a large oak tree, its leaves a brilliant gold against the blue sky. Nathan seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man typically so direct. "The day we met," he finally began, "when I found you on the church steps in the rain, it wasn't the first time I'd seen you." Josephine frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I'd seen you around town many times before teaching the children, shopping at the mercantile, walking in the evening." His eyes held a distant look of memory. "I admired you from afar, your grace, your intelligence, the way you smiled at your students." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "I had no idea. I wanted to introduce myself properly, but then I heard you were engaged to Whitaker." A shadow crossed his face. "I knew his type all too well, but it wasn't my place to interfere, so I stayed away, told myself it was for the best. And then," Josephine prompted gently, "and then I rode into town that day and saw you sitting there in your wedding dress, abandoned and heartbroken." Nathan's gaze was direct now, unflinching. "I should have been sorry for your pain, and I was, but beneath that there was a selfish thought I couldn't suppress. She's free." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. "That's why I offered you a place at the Double E," he continued quietly. "Not just out of decency, though that was part of it, but because I couldn't bear the thought of you leaving, not when I finally had a chance to know you." Josephine sat very still, absorbing his words. "Why tell me this now?" "Because watching Thornton pursue, you made me realize how easily I could lose you again. You deserve to know the truth before making any decisions about your future." He looked down at his hands. "I understand if this changes how you see me or your desire to continue at the ranch." "Nathan." She waited until he looked up, meeting his eyes steadily. "When you found me that day, I was at the lowest point of my life. I felt worthless, discarded. You gave me not just shelter, but purpose and dignity." She took a deep breath. "Over these months, I've come to care for you deeply, not out of gratitude, but because of who you are, your integrity, your quiet strength, the way you value what truly matters." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Josephine, are you saying—" "I'm saying," she interrupted gently, "that far from being troubled by your admission, I'm honored by it. And," she gathered her courage, "I'm saying that I love you, Nathan Eastwood." The transformation of his expression was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual at first, then blazing with light. Without a word, he reached for her hand, enfolding it in both of his. "I love you, Josephine Dawson," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I have since the first time I saw you teaching those children, your face alight with passion for learning." "Then why did you wait so long to speak?" she asked softly. "At first, because you were healing from betrayal. I wouldn't take advantage of your vulnerability." His thumb traced gentle patterns on her palm. "Later, because I feared you saw me only as a benefactor or at best a friend. I couldn't bear to jeopardize what we had. And now," a smile spread across his face, not the reserved smile she was accustomed to, but something radiant and unguarded. "Now, if you'll permit me, I'd like to court you properly. No rushed proposals, no fairy tales, just honest affection between equals." Josephine felt joy bubbling up within her. "I'd like that very much." Their first kiss, when it came, was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he murmured. "Why didn't you?" she teased. His expression grew serious again. "Because when I kiss a woman, I want it to be a promise, and I needed to be certain you wanted that promise from me." The depth of his consideration touched her deeply. This was what had been missing with Franklin, this fundamental respect, this recognition of her as a whole person with agency and value beyond being someone's wife. Their remaining days in Cheyenne took on a dreamlike quality. They still attended to business. Nathan concluded his dealings with the army, securing an excellent price for the horses, but now there was an undercurrent of joy in every interaction. Rebecca, observing their changed dynamic, merely smiled knowingly and made herself scarce at opportune moments. The journey back to the Double E was filled with plans and possibilities. Nathan spoke of improvements to the ranch house, of expanding the library to include more of the books Josephine loved, of perhaps building a small schoolhouse on the property for the children of the ranch hands. "You miss teaching," he observed. "There's no reason you can't continue in some capacity while still managing the ranch's affairs." Josephine was touched by his thoughtfulness. "You've given this consideration." "I've had months to think about how to make you happy," he admitted with a smile. "Just in case my feelings were ever returned." As the train rolled through the Wyoming and Montana landscapes, Josephine found herself reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. If Franklin hadn't abandoned her, she would never have known this deeper, truer love. The thought was both sobering and exhilarating. Their return to the Double E was met with knowing smiles from Mary and the Hands, who had apparently been anticipating this development for some time. "About time," Mary muttered when Nathan formally announced their courtship. "Been watching you two dance around each other for months. Thought I might have to lock you in the root cellar together to get some action." Life at the ranch continued much as before, with one significant difference: Nathan no longer maintained his careful distance. He sought out Josephine's company whenever possible, their evening discussions by the fire now punctuated by tender kisses and shared dreams for the future. Winter arrived in earnest, blanketing the valley in snow and turning the Double E into an island of warmth amid the frozen landscape. The enforced isolation of the season gave them precious time together, deepening their understanding of each other without the distractions of town or frequent visitors. On Christmas Eve, with a blizzard howling outside and the house festooned with greenery and candles, Nathan asked Josephine to join him on the porch. Despite the cold, he seemed determined to speak privately. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. Josephine's heart quickened. "Nathan." "It's not what you think," he said quickly, though his smile suggested it wasn't far off, or rather, not exactly. Inside the box was a beautiful ring, a simple gold band set with a single perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," Nathan explained. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart as she had captured my father's." "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed. "I'm not asking for your hand tonight," Nathan said carefully. "We agreed on a proper courtship, and I'm a man of my word. But I wanted you to have this as a promise that when the time is right, if you're certain of your feelings, I will ask." Josephine looked up at him, this man who had rescued her from despair and shown her what love truly meant. "I'm certain now," she said softly. "I don't need more time, Nathan." His expression filled with wonder. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying ask me now." Nathan took her hands in his, the ring box between them. Snow swirled around the porch, but neither noticed the cold. "Josephine Dawson, you walked into my life when I least expected and most needed you. You've brought light and purpose to my days, challenged my thinking, and shown me that the future I dreamed of is possible." He took a deep breath. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, the single word carrying all the certainty of her heart. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Nathan pulled her close. "You know," he murmured against her hair, "in a strange way, we have Franklin Whitaker to thank for this." Josephine laughed softly. "I'm not sure I can go that far." "Think about it," Nathan insisted. "If he hadn't left you at the altar, if I hadn't found you on those church steps." He drew back to look into her eyes. "Maybe it wasn't abandonment after all. Maybe it was destiny." "What do you mean?" Nathan's eyes held a certainty that warmed her more than any fire could. "You weren't waiting for Franklin that day. You were waiting for me." The truth of his words resonated deep within her. All the pain, all the uncertainty, all the twists of fate had led her here to this man, this love, this future. What had seemed like an ending had merely been the beginning of something far more precious. "I was waiting for you," Josephine echoed, reaching up to touch his face. "I just didn't know it yet." Their wedding took place the following spring, when the valley was abloom with wildflowers and new life. Unlike her abandoned ceremony with Franklin, this one was simple and heartfelt, held on the ranch with only close friends and the hands in attendance. Mary wept openly throughout, claiming it was dust in her eyes. Josephine wore a dress of pale blue rather than white, with her mother's lace veil and Nathan's mother's ring. As they spoke their vows beneath an arch of spring blossoms, with Silver Creek murmuring nearby and the mountains standing witness, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended mere happiness. This was where she belonged, not as a desperate woman taken in from the rain, but as an equal partner in love and life. The path that had brought her here might have been winding and sometimes painful, but standing beside Nathan as she pledged her life to his, Josephine knew she wouldn't change a single step. As Nathan kissed her to seal their vows, he whispered against her lips, "Welcome home, Mrs. Eastwood." And in those 3 simple words was everything she'd ever wanted: belonging, acceptance, and a love that had been worth waiting for.